At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb detonated at 600 meters above Hiroshima. Please look at this panoramic photo. It was taken near the hypocenter by the U.S. military a few months after the bombing. The hypocenter is the point on the ground directly beneath the A-bomb explosion. As far as you can see, most of the buildings were crushed and burned. Rows of houses, bustling shopping streets, children's laughter at schools, and all normal life in the city were devastated in an instant by a single atomic bomb. A single atomic bomb burned the whole city, killed tens of thousands of people, and drastically changed the lives of the survivors. That day, what really happened under the mushroom cloud? The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum has been collecting and preserving materials, including A-bomb artifacts, photos, and A-bomb drawings by survivors. Those items are on display in the main building and present the reality of the atomic bombing. Each item carries the memories and sentiments of victims and bereaved family members. Please listen carefully to these silent witnesses and imagine what happened that day. Miyuki Bridge was covered with severely burned people. I held the camera up, but I couldn't snap the shutter. Finally, after about 20 minutes, I took my first picture. "Help me. Water, please." An infant clung to the breast of a mother, too weak to move. "Open your eyes. Open your eyes." A distraught mother cradled her child, calling its name over and over. Their hair was singed and frizzy. Their faces, arms, backs, legs, their whole bodies were badly burnt. Blisters had burst, and burnt skin hung from them like rags. The tears flowing down my cheeks blurred my viewfinder. It was hell. Around 11 a.m., nearly 3 hours after the bombing, Miyuki Bridge, 2,270 meters from the hypocenter, was crowded with those who fled the fire. Many had severe burns. Many died there, having exhausted all energy in their escape. Hair was singed and frizzy. Burnt skin hung like rags. These two photographs are the only images taken on August 6th of people in that devastated area. On the bridge, a police officer was applying cooking oil, the only first aid available, to burns. The scene was so shocking and heartbreaking that photographer Yoshito Matsushige couldn't press the shutter. Finally, after about 20 minutes of hesitation, he took his first picture. The scene in his viewfinder, blurred by tears flowing down his cheeks. After the bomb exploded, a strange cloud never seen before billowed into the sky over Hiroshima. The cloud was seen from great distances. Witnesses said it was orange, pink, and other colors. Of all our photos of the mushroom cloud, this one was taken from closest to the hypocenter. Toshio Fukada, who snapped the shutter, was 17. At the munitions factory where he had been mobilized to work, the blast threw him through the air. When he looked up, a tremendous amount of smoke was rising high in the sky. At the time of the bombing, 14-year-old Nobuko Shoda was at her building demolition worksite, 1,200 meters from the hypocenter. She didn't come home that night. On the 7th, the day after the bombing, her parents went to her worksite. They found Nobuko burned severely over much of her body. Her clothes were tattered. The skin was burned off her hands, and her face and legs were swollen. Her father, who was also injured, carried Nobuko on his back to the hospital, but she could not receive adequate treatment. The following day, her parents took Nobuko home and cared for her. On August 10th, they rejoiced that the swelling on her face had gone down a little. Moments later, Nobuko let out a big yawn and never opened her eyes again. The seven-story Hiroshima Fukoku building stood 330 meters from the hypocenter. The blast pounded the roof so powerfully, it badly bent and sheared the iron framing above the ceiling of the top floor. The building remained standing, but iron window frames were blown out and inner walls collapsed. The Hiroshima Telegraph Office occupied the first 5 floors and basement of the building. At the time of the bombing, 117 employees were at work. The business log from that day says that all the machinery and instruments were scattered, and the building was instantly rendered a hell on earth. Employees trapped under collapsed walls were engulfed in advancing flames. Most of the 117 employees died. Soon after the A-bomb explosion, radioactive smoke, dirt, soot, and other matter was blown into the sky, forming a black cloud. Mixing with water vapor in the air, the dirt and soot fell as a heavy rain over a wide range of the city. This radioactive rain came to be called black rain. In areas where the black rain fell, fish in ponds and rivers died and floated to the surface. Many who drank well water were said to have suffered from diarrhea for as long as 3 months. Feeling intense thirst due to the heat from the fires after the bombing, many victims drank the black rain. Akiko Takakura, who drew this picture, looked back on that time as follows. People were so thirsty that when the rain started, we opened our mouths wide and turned our faces upward to drink it in. But it was hard to do. The black raindrops were so huge, it hurt when they hit us. I got soaked by that rain. I didn't mind at all at the time, but I remember that my whole body turned gray. It took some time to wash that rain off. I am the one in this picture. I opened my mouth as wide as possible, throwing my head back to wet my throat. Everyone around me did the same. This wall was knocked loose from a house located about 3,700 meters west of the hypocenter. The A-bomb blast made a gap between the roof and the wall, so the black rain fell through the gap into the house, leaving these black streaks on the white plaster. Analysis of the black rain streaks found trace amounts of radioactive fallout from the A-bomb explosion. The intense heat emitted by the A-bomb explosion ignited houses. In addition, kitchen and other household fires started from within collapsed houses all around the city, growing into a city-wide conflagration. Everything combustible within 2 kilometers of the hypocenter was burned, leaving the area filled with objects melted by the fire. 2 days after the atomic bombing, Sachiko Hayashi and her father dug into the rooms of her home and found the bones of her mother, who died under the collapsed house. She captured that experience in the following poem. Oh, Mommy's bones. Oh, when I squeeze them tight, white powder dances in the wind. Mommy's bones. When I put one in my mouth, it tastes lonely. Unbearable sorrow rising in my father and me. Left behind, screaming, picking up bones, putting them in a sweets box where they rustle dryly. After the bombing, many people walked around the burned ruins, searching for missing family members. Those who found neither body nor bones brought home some unburned items to remember them by. Many of the hospitals were destroyed. Temporary relief stations were set up along riverbanks, beneath bridges, and other places where the injured gathered. Schools, banks, and other buildings left standing were also commandeered. There were no beds. Medicine and supplies were scarce. The injured were laid on straw mats on the floor, without adequate medical treatment. These photos show the emergency relief station of the 2nd Army Hospital and a scene inside one of the tents. The hospital was totally destroyed and burnt. Tents were set up on the Old Tagawa riverbank to take on the hospital's tasks, but they were soon overwhelmed with injured victims. Their badly burned bodies were swollen, their wounds crawling with maggots. One after the next, they died in agony. Some even jumped to their deaths in the river to escape the horrible pain. The burnt ruins were strewn with countless bodies. Military personnel and civilians who came to help from around the prefecture disposed of the bodies. The intense heat and stench of decomposing corpses made their work grueling. Takumi Nakamura, then 45, entered Hiroshima City on the day of the bombing to provide relief as leader of a civil defense team. Using this hook, Takumi pulled out bodies that were floating down the river. Walking in from his suburban home every morning, Takumi performed this service for more than 10 consecutive days. Corpses recovered in this way were gathered and piled up on riversides, in schoolyards, and in other open areas, and were cremated. Day after day, smoke from cremation fires around the city billowed into the sky. When the bomb exploded, 24-year-old Nobue Tadao was at home 600 meters from the hypocenter. She was trapped under the collapsed house, but managed to crawl out. With the help of a man who was passing by, Nobue made it to her family's evacuation site outside the city at 12 midnight of the next day. Nobue sustained severe burns on the left side of her body. Her upper lip was torn, and countless glass fragments pierced much of her weak body. She kept asking for water or tea. Her wounds were excruciating. After days and nights of devoted nursing, she died on August 18th. Blood still stains the dress she wore that day. One day in 1974, an A-bomb survivor walked into the NHK Hiroshima broadcasting station carrying a single drawing based on his A-bomb experiences. He had been watching an NHK TV serial drama about an orphan who had lost her memory because of her A-bomb experience. The drama stirred up memories of his own experience. I have to get this down before I die. This intense feeling compelled him to draw the horrible scene engraved in his memory. These drawings were not created by professional artists. Survivors who witnessed the A-bomb aftermath with their own eyes drew pictures of the horrific situations they could not put into words, then added words to express the emotions they could not draw. These graphic scenes and descriptions are cries from the hearts of survivors, determined to convey the horrors of the A-bomb to future generations. 3-year-old Shinichi Tetsutani was riding this tricycle when the A-bomb exploded. Suffering severe injuries and burns over much of his body, he died that night, moaning, "Water, water." His father could not stand to cremate Shinichi. He put this metal helmet on Shinichi's head and buried him in the backyard, along with his tricycle, so Shinichi could keep riding it. In 1985, 40 years later, the father decided to place Shinichi's remains in the family grave. He dug carefully using a brush and found Shinichi's bones, the helmet, and the tricycle. He placed the bones in the family grave and donated the helmet and tricycle to the museum.
The rest of audio and photos are not synced as I am missing either one.
People fleeing from raging fire headed for bridges and rivers. Most bridges were crushed or burned away, but people managed to escape across those not totally destroyed. Crowds entered the rivers for water or to swim to the opposite side. Sadly, the water consumed the last strength of many, and they died. Soon countless bodies were floating on the rivers. The intense heat emitted by the A-bomb was lethal. It also left its mark on temple gravestones and stone lanterns. These flower stands were located at Dempukuji Temple, 370 meters from the hypocenter. Temperatures near the hypocenter reached 3,000 to 4,000 degrees Celsius. The heat burned the quartz crystals on the surface of the stands, revealing the whitish inner stone. Dempukuji Temple collapsed and burned completely. The remains of head priest Shodo Suzuki and his wife Yoshiko were found in the scorched ruins. At the time of the bombing, 12-year-old Tetsuo Kitabayashi was at his building demolition worksite, 600 meters from the hypocenter. He returned home with his badly swollen face altered beyond recognition. Despite his parents' desperate care, Tetsuo died the following day, the 7th, singing in delirium. Tetsuo's father wrote about the death of his son. "I ran down to the second floor, but he had no pulse. It was over. 4:20 p.m. Sorrow, anger, regret, and pain. Nothing could be worse. We held his wake. I wept and wept." The Army Clothing Depot produced and stored Army uniforms, shoes, caps, and other items worn by soldiers. Though located 2,670 meters from the hypocenter, its iron shutters facing the hypocenter were bent by the blast. The junior high students mobilized to work there were blown several meters and hurled to the ground. After the bombing, people suffering from severe burns poured into the depot, their skin peeled and hanging. They were laid down close to each other on the floor, leaving no space to step. The warehouse was filled with desperate voices, calling for family or begging for water. Poet Sankichi Toge described the pitiful scene in the Hiroshima Army Clothing Depot in the following poem titled Notes from the Warehouse. Next to the walls and behind the thick pillars are pails and buckets full of vomit, urine, and feces, some of it spilt across the floor. From within the putrid smell, their pleading voices arise ceaselessly, high-pitched and feeble. Help! Daddy, help me! Oh, water! Water! How happy I am! 50 cents. Here's 50 cents. Get this dead body away from my feet. Some are wildly deranged, others motionless in death, but there is nobody to remove them. Distraught, questing parents come in from time to time to peer at faces or patterns on girls' trousers. Looking severe in their air raid clothing, their faces are ashen. When the girls hear someone coming in, their wailings rise to a historic chorus of begging for help and water. Mister, water! Bring me water! One girl, hairless, with one eye distorted and body swelling, raises herself from behind a pillar. She thrusts her battered flask up at them, waving it repeatedly in desperation, but the adults have been told not to give water to burn victims, so they ignore her pleas. The moans fade into a reproachful murmur, and the girl collapses again behind the pillar. Sakaru Okada was running his pharmacy 470 meters from the hypocenter when the atomic bomb killed him, his wife, and 2 employees. His worried older brother Ichiro, who had been injured while riding a streetcar, headed for the burned ruins on August 9th. With his head in a bandage, Ichiro dug up the ruins and found the remains of Sakaru and his wife. To remember them by, he took this burned safe home on a cart with their remains. When he found the safe, the door was slightly open, and the rice, documents, and paper money inside were carbonized. When the bomb exploded, 13-year-old Toshiko Sekioka was at her building demolition worksite, 800 meters from the hypocenter. Employed as a school clerk, Toshiko's mother had to start issuing disaster certificates immediately. She could not leave to search for her daughter. Toshiko's cap, air raid hood, and fabric bag were delivered later. The cap Toshiko wore was her mother's. Her body was never found. The morning of August 6th, Toshiko had asked, "Can I stay home today? I have a headache." Her mother said no. For the rest of her days, she blamed herself. "I forced my daughter to go to work for the country, and that killed her. Under bluish-white sparkles, my skin sloughs off. In my blood-soaked eyes, the sun is dark. I flee over the gritty sand, supporting faltering legs with a bamboo stick. Her torn flesh exposing bone, a mother crouches on the road, grasping a dead infant and coughing up something black. It's hot. It's hot. Mother!" His eyes smashed, clothes burnt by the flash. A junior high student writhes on the ground, blowing bloody bubbles. Hair standing straight up, arms raised to the sky. Alive or dead? Male or female? Just a gray face, floating in the river. These stone steps were taken from the entrance to the Hiroshima branch of the Sumitomo Bank, located 260 meters from the hypocenter. Exposed to the A-bomb explosion at close range, the person sitting on the steps is assumed to have died on the spot, with no possibility of escape. The intense heat turned the stone steps whitish, while the place under the sitting person remained dark, like a shadow. The building had continued being used, but when it was rebuilt in 1971, the stone steps were cut out and donated to the museum. Several families have suggested that the person killed on the steps may have been a member of their family. This picture of a policeman was taken on August 6th. Despite his own injuries, he was issuing disaster certificates to fellow victims. The certificate was necessary to receive food rations and a coupon for clothes. The atomic bombing paralyzed the municipal and prefectural governments in Hiroshima. Communication and transportation were impossible. The official relief system was destroyed. Despite the turmoil, military personnel, including the Army Marine Headquarters, known as the Akatsuki Corps, surviving doctors, and police officers took the lead, carrying out rescue and relief beginning almost immediately. People from neighboring towns and villages entered the city to help with relief activities. On the 7th, the military, the government, and the people united in full-scale relief and rescue activities. Injured people were transported to relief stations by truck, ship, boat, and train. Relief supplies were delivered from various sources. Aiko was 9 years old. Her younger brother, Toru, was 7. They were exposed to the A-bomb on the second floor of a bathhouse, 1,000 meters from the hypocenter. School children were being dispersed to locations other than schools to protect them from air raids. Aiko and Toru fled to an air raid shelter. When the shelter filled with the severely injured, they were forced outside and were caught in the black rain. 4 or 5 days later, their hair began falling out. Aiko lost her appetite and developed a fever, bleeding from the gums, and other symptoms. Both recovered from the acute effects. 4 years after the bombing, Toru suddenly fell ill after returning from a field trip and died at the age of 11. Aiko got married and had a son. However, 20 years after the bombing, she died of cancer at the age of 29. Shinichi's father, Nobuo, tearfully shared this memory.
真一はもう、顔がですね。
Shinichi was burned so badly. His eyes were barely visible on his swollen face. He begged, "Give me water. Water." We had been told that water would kill a person with burns, so I said, "Water would kill you. I need you to just hang on, please." I made him go without water. And he died anyway. When I get to this part, I can't go on. It's too painful. For 30 years, I couldn't speak about the bombing at all. After losing my child, I woke up every night. I couldn't lie still. I walked around the burned ruins, shouting out loud. These clothes were worn by 3 students who were killed in the bombing. First-year student Eiichi Tsuda was wearing the cap and belt. His father searched for him while bearing his own injuries. He found Eiichi's body just before noon the next day near Tenma Bridge. Second-year student Hajime Fukuoka was wearing the jacket and trousers. His mother searched desperately, but never found him. Only these clothes were picked up and delivered by his classmate's father. She left Hajime's room as it was and bought the necessary textbooks for the next semester so that he could come home any time. First-year student Masayuki Ueda was wearing these gaiters. He fled to neighboring Fukushima-cho and was saved by a resident of the town. His father and older sister searched for Masayuki, but didn't learn his whereabouts in time. Masayuki died on August 8th without seeing his family again. Shigeru's mother, Shigeko, wrote about finding Shigeru's body as follows. I went there, but couldn't find my son among the large number of dead bodies. Suddenly, a facial bone of one of the bodies caught my eye. I stared at the face, and the bone seemed to come alive. I feel our blood connection drew my eyes to it. I searched under the body and found in the stomach area a lunchbox, water bottle, and buckle from a bag. On the lunchbox and the water bottle was the name Masaaki, Shigeru's older brother. I had etched that name with a drill. I had found Shigeru. It really was him, but I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to think he was still alive somewhere. With eyes flooding with tears, I picked up the bones and put them into the urn I had brought. Building demolition refers to the tearing down of buildings to create fire breaks to prevent the spread of fire caused by air raids. Demolition work was carried out manually with saws and ropes. In Hiroshima City, building demolition projects were carried out 6 times from the end of 1944 to August 1945. On August 6th, the 6th and largest demolition project was just getting underway. Thousands of people, including mobilized students, were working outside. Directly exposed to the explosion, they died horribly. Yoshiro's mother wrote down her memory of finding his lunchbox. When my sister and I walked in the Koamicho area in early September, I said, "Isn't this where our children were bombed?" I looked at the burned field and noticed a pile of debris. In that pile, I found familiar buttons from municipal junior high uniforms. I saw unburnt clothes, lunchboxes, and other objects. We ran toward the school in Nakahiromachi to let the authorities know about the pile of things that belonged to deceased students. Several teachers and students went back to the pile with us. Among those objects, my sister found a lunchbox and shouted, "It's Yoshiro's!" On the lunchbox, Mutsuoka was etched 4 or 5 times with a knife. One of the students told me calmly, "Mrs. Mutsuoka, Yoshiro etched those himself when we were doing labor service last year." The boys who kindly followed us had been in Yoshiro's class. At the time of the bombing, my son was still in the 1st grade because he had taken 1 year off from school due to illness. His friends, who had been assigned elsewhere as 2nd-year students, were all saved. What tragic bad luck for my son. In September, 1 month after the bombing, Kazuo Kimura resumed writing in his diary. "I will absolutely not die. In any case, I will be a professor at the Imperial University." Having lost his friends, as well as his younger sister, Kazuo expressed his strong will to live in his diary. Despite his determination, Bad health continued to plague Kazuo, robbing his ability to concentrate and study. I have no fight left in me at all. Idiot. Idiot. All of my feelings are numb. I'm tired all day. Gradually, his handwriting grew sloppy. Kazuo wrote his last entry on April 26, 1948. With his body swollen from illness, Kazuo died on August 9th that year. To the end, he continued to groan in his pain. I hate it. I don't want to die. The atomic bomb destroyed lives, regardless of their national or ethnic origins. Tens of thousands of people from the Korean Peninsula, as well as Taiwanese, Chinese, and Japanese Americans, were living in Hiroshima at the time, including those who had been conscripted or recruited from these areas. Other non-Japanese, including students from Southeast Asia and China, priests from Germany, Russian families, and American POWs also became victims. Japanese American youths had come to Japan to be educated in their parents' homeland. The students from Southeast Asia and China were invited by the Japanese government to attend Hiroshima Higher Normal School, or the Hiroshima University of Literature and Science. The German priests were engaged in missionary work at Catholic churches, while the Russians were running bakeries and tailor shops. The American POWs were shot down and captured during air raids against Japan.